Welcome back, everybody. After a break here, we are picking up with an introduction of S135 and an act relating to the establishment of Vermont Savings. Senator Brock, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. For the record, it's Randy Brock from the Senate. I will just tell you the same thing that I told the Senate when I presented this bill on the floor. And I rarely say anything like this. I love this bill. It's a great bill. And I love it for a variety of reasons. One, it solves a problem, or at least begins to solve a problem that we as a state had. It doesn't cost a lot of money to actually start up and do, and nor does it have a lot of continuing expense. It doesn't cost the taxpayers any future money, and it doesn't raise taxes. It actually gives something back to individual Vermonters, and it gives something back to the state because it ultimately has the potential of saving us money. And last but not least, we're not the first in the nation to do it. And that's pretty important because so often what happens is we pass things, we're the first in the nation to do it, and then we pay the price because we don't know how to do it. Here we have a number of other states who've done this already, so we can measure what they've done and the kind of success that they achieve. Essentially, what the bill does is it takes a look at a problem. And the problem is that only 5% of Americans without workplace retirement savings are saving for retirement. And more than half of small employers don't offer retirement saving plans. 2/3 of individuals without a workplace plan have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. And most Vermonters don't have adequate emergency savings. When an employer does not offer a retirement savings plan, on average, the statistics tell us that fewer than 5% of its employees are saving for retirement. But when an employer does offer such a plan, over 70% of employees participate in that plan. Vermonters who aren't covered by retirement plans are lower earning, younger, less educated, more likely to be BIPOC, more likely to be female. And as a result, historically, Vermonters and Americans in disadvantaged groups are less prepared for financially secure retirement than others. 63% of savers without an employer plan have less than $10,000. And that's significant. Our plan that's contained in this particular bill is a Roth IRA. And there are two kinds of IRAs. There's a Roth IRA and there's a traditional IRA. The Roth IRA is distinguished because it's contributed with after-tax money from its savers. Regular IRAs are pre-tax money. The advantage of the Roth IRA, particularly for the groups that we're talking about, is it's always their money. They don't have to wait until they're retired, or they don't have to suffer a penalty to take their own money out of the plan. And this plan, as proposed, is both a retirement savings plan, which is principal purpose, and that's how it's used in other states more than anything else, but it also is an emergency savings plan. You know, the people who have some sort of a medical emergency right now in Vermont, more than half, if not more, of Vermonters who are employed, who don't have retirement plans, have less than $1,000 available to meet an emergency. That's pretty significant. What this plan does is it puts money aside. The earnings from that money, yes, you can't take out without some sort of a penalty early because that's tax advantage money. But the money that you put in is your money. It's after-tax money. You can take it out whenever you want to. The plan offers a lot of flexibility because every employee by default is put into the plan if they don't have a retirement plan already. But they can immediately opt out. The plan talks about using a 5% rate, which is consistent with what other states have done. But an employee can decide it's anything less than that, including zero, at any point in time. It's payroll deduction. And the payroll deduction, again, the emphasis is their money. Among the advantages of programs like this is people who don't have plans depend on Social Security for retirement. and usually not an awful lot of it. And we all know that as one who gets Social Security, it's not a lot of money. It's not enough money for many people to be able to live on in retirement. By supplementing the amount of money that is available that people in fact save, we make people stronger so that they are better able to achieve retirement. But we also help the state because it potentially saves us money, because when people don't have the money to be able to support themselves, the state winds up supporting them or contributing to their support. So this is a plan that's designed to make people more self-sufficient. It also is designed to make the individuals wealthier, both in terms of what they are able to save themselves. But just as important, by setting that money aside, it means that they are better prepared for emergencies and they're better prepared for retirement. Every year that you could defer retirement from your first available date at age 62 up to the normal retirement date of age 67, every year you can delay taking Social Security money out will increase the earnings that you can take out, or the money that you can take out from Social Security, up to 7 to 8% for every year thereafter for the rest of your life. That's significant, particularly as we're all learning to live longer. By and large, we heard from a lot of people about this particular bill. Among the things, of course, that we heard is what's happened in other states that have put these together. In Oregon and California, savers are setting aside an average of about $2,000 per year. Total assets under management in the 6 active states that have this plan right now, $735 million as of January 31st of this year. And the average account balances are growing rapidly. There are 12 states at this point who have passed this legislation, 6 of which are active and the others are in the process. And what we're seeing is that these numbers are growing, both in terms of states, minimum cost to establish such a plan, no cost to employers at all involved in the plan, and the fact that employees have full control over their money. This has a phased rollout. Employers with 25 employees or more by July 1 of 2025, 15 to 24 by July 1 of 2026, and 5 to 14 employers by July 1 of 2026. We're also looking at under 5 employers. The Treasurer's Office, I know, is looking at that. Oregon is currently in the process of rolling out an under 5. And again, we'll have an example to look at with sufficient time to do so, to see if that makes sense, and to say that it works. That basically is the bill in a nutshell. We heard from representatives of the Treasurer's Office, we've heard from AARP, and we heard from the Department of Aging and Independent Living, and we haven't heard anything opposed to it. Everything has been in favor. And this is something that I strongly recommend for your committee to take a serious look at.
Well, thank you for giving us the initial sales pitch on the bill. These folks on the committee have questions for the Senate reporter here, Senator Representative Higley. I'm good at you, Representative.
Senator, thank you. And I know my own personal history is getting out of the service at age 22. I didn't have an idea at all as far as, what I would be saving for. Fortunately, I had a friend who was selling whole life insurance policies and convinced me to invest in that. So that's basically what I had for a long time. I guess my question is that I haven't really looked things over yet or talked to the treasurer, but what about getting young people interested? Is there a campaign around this to make sure that they have some sort of an understanding as to how important this is? Because I think for me at 22, it would help me to have somebody explain to me a little bit closer as to, hey, you're going to need this in the future.
That's absolutely correct. I know that the Treasurer's Office has things in mind that they perhaps could describe to you, but I've heard talk around the building from time to time that, gee, wouldn't it be great to have financial literacy be something that is a thing that almost every kid in school ought to be learning something about. And that's this is the first step.
Thank you.
Representative Morgan.
Yep, thank you. So Senator, it's just, if I read it clearly, I believe the answer is yes, but it's 100% employee funded, no matching contributions of any sort.
No matching contributions. In fact, there can't be matching contributions. Some have asked, well, gee, can an employer decide to put in some money to help the employee? And the answer is unfortunately no, because otherwise, if you have an employer-sponsored plan like a 401k or similar, you are entangled in ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which is a nightmare, extremely complex, and also extremely costly in long run. So by having it belonging entirely to the employer, it makes it simpler, it makes it cleaner, it makes it easier to administer, makes it less costly for the state, and it also, I think, makes it a lot clearer to the employee. It's his money or her money.
And you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, your choice, up to that 5.
Up to that 5. And there are provisions in the bill to actually increase the top limit that one can deduct in future years.
Great, thank you.
Representative Hooper.
Thank you, sir. Can you give me some background on why the implementation is over 3 years when particularly a shocking number of employers in Vermont are under 10 employees, under 15 employees, and they seem to be the most in need maybe? And
I think it's principally, and I'll let the treasurer explain his motive for setting that limit up, but I think the principal reason is prudence, that by starting out more slowly with larger employers, we get more experience in how folks in Vermont are acting to the deductions and how employers are administering it, and making sure that we don't create administrative burdens that would require additional state employees, state staff, state IT resources. This is entirely one, and again, it's one of the things I love about it. It doesn't require us to set up a new employee system to be able to deduct this from employers. This is going to be administered entirely by a third-party administrator, which is frequently the case with retirement savings plans that large corporations do. And again, it's to minimize the overhead, and by going more slowly, I think we can be more prudent. I would expect, though, that if this is spectacularly successful in the beginning and spectacularly easy to administer, that we would think again about perhaps accelerating.
Thank you, Senator Brack, for giving us the first look at the bill. I'd like to invite Treasurer Pete Schaaf to take chair next. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to the committee, and thank you to Senator Brock, who did a great job overviewing the merits of the bill and I think some of the details as well. So maybe I'll just start with some of the questions that were asked that I could provide a little bit more detail on. So to Representative Higley's question, there are two positions that will be funded out of the Vermont Saves, not as the senator said, from tax revenue, but from fees that will be charged to individual members, fees that are low and much lower than what they'd charge in a 401k. So that is the good news. But one of those positions would be an outreach coordinator whose focus would be both to work with businesses to make sure they're prepared for the program implementation, but also to work with employees and work with employers to work with their employees to understand the benefits of such a program. And as you point out, I mean, there's a tremendous number of younger workers that are in this category of not being covered by a workplace retirement plan. So a tremendous number of younger Vermonters that would be covered under Vermont Saves. And the ability to save in your 20s and in your 30s really would be quite significant over the rest of your lifetime. So that certainly will be a message that we'll be working on getting across to everybody. And to Representative Hooper's question, so the bill passes this session, then we'll have 2 years basically until the first employers are participating in the program. So we will have to hire the director of the program. We'll have to secure the vendors. There's 2 vendors, primarily one that would work with the businesses to set up payroll deductions, to set up the Roth IRAs. Then there's a vendor that would provide the actual investments that will be in and available to those with the Roth IRAs. That could take a little bit of time. They'll have to get their website specific to Vermont. We'll want to test that with some employers. We'll want to do outreach to those employers to make sure they're familiar with the program that's coming down the pike. And then once that starts in July 2025, basically 6 months, another group will come on, 6 months, the last group will come on. And that's just to make sure we can pivot if anything, turns out to be an issue during the implementation. I will say, as the senator pointed out, that could be accelerated. Vermont's a smaller state. The state of Colorado just went through their first phase and had over 120,000 employees sign up on a single day. So, even if we're successful, we'll have maybe 65,000 employees in total for the whole program. So it's something that I think a vendor could handle if we ended up implementing it on one day instead of over multiple periods.
Does our current DC administrator do this?
They're not one of the vendors. Yeah.
Drive down cost.
Yeah. Well, one thing that could drive down costs even more is working with a vendor that certainly has worked with other states just because they have experience with this program, but then potentially partnering with another state the couple of likely candidates would be our neighbor, Connecticut, that has passed this. Rhode Island is in the process of passing it this session. So if both of those states stood up a very similar program, Connecticut's already stood it up, but if Rhode Island follows suit, then we'll have a couple of New England neighbors that we could potentially partner with to drive the fees down even more.
And how large a range of funds would individuals have, or is it simply a savings?
So generally in these other states, Connecticut has a wide variety relative to some, but if you think of it as like 6 or 7 target date funds, so there's like a secure holdings fund, which is, pretty risk adverse. And then maybe there's a target fund 10 years out, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on. So if an employee does no action, they're defaulted into the plan, the money is defaulted into a Roth IRA for them, their money would go into a target date that most closely aligns with their likely retirement age and likely retirement date. So they would have that choice made for them. They could go in and put it into the secure, investment. They could put it into something more aggressive. So there'll be a limited range, which sort of helps with making sure people don't, folks that might not be as experienced with investing really can't go too far, and get themselves in trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you for revamping the conversation on this. I know it's been going on for quite a few years. So the states that have implemented already, what kind of participation rate are they seeing?
Yeah, so the early states like Oregon, Illinois, California have reported 70 to 75% of the employees stay in the program. The specific number that gets thrown around is 73%, but between 70 and 75% are remaining opted into the program. And that's in the first year of the operation. So I think a natural question would be, well, what about the second year? Yeah. And they're reporting back that like over north of 95% of folks are staying in the program like year over year. So it makes sense, like this inertia that's preventing people from signing up on their own for a plan like this is something that's also working in their favor once it's provided to them, that inertia of continuing to save year over year over year once it's done for you automatically and taken care of from a payroll deduction.
Okay, now those are stronger numbers than I thought you were going to cite, so that's certainly encouraging.
Yeah, no, it's what really encouraged us to look at this program that these other states have implemented. Their success rate has been quite surprising in a good way.
Is it? And the states that have implemented for a greater period of time, do you have any data for us to think that maybe shows like a breakdown, age ranges, like see what the demos are or anything like that, just as a.
So there's a slide that we presented in our presentation, that's slide 3. And it just breaks down the Vermont expectation in terms of age. There's an estimate of 88,000 Vermonters that don't have a workplace retirement plan. And then right below that, there's sort of the age breakdown. And we don't have any data that suggests it would be different than how the 73% would fall based on each of these categories. So I think it would be disproportionately younger. You can see that almost 50% of the folks that don't have workplace retirement are under the age of 34, with, the other cohorts having about 15,000 or so in them beyond that. So that's great to be able to offer something to someone that's that young to be able to start saving, where now they're basically saving nothing.
Yeah, that's all I have. Representative?
Embarrassing question.
Yeah.
Is there a cap on the amount you can put in Roth?
Yes, there is. I think, and for this year, it's 6,500 It's contemplated potentially to go up. It usually goes up every number of years. The average savings that the other states are seeing are $2,000 a year. So it doesn't seem like generally people are running into that cap. These are like we were talking about, lower wage earners, you know, $2,000 aside is a significant portion of their overall income, and it's post-tax as well. So there is, but we have found, these other states have found that that cap has worked for them for this program. One thing the senator didn't mention, which I do want to make sure I get across, is that the federal government has enacted a revamped savers credit. So the savers credit is coming into play in 2027. And if you are a lower wage earner, so that seems to be someone making $70,000 or lower, sort of tiered out at about $70,000, and you're saving money into a qualified retirement plan on your own. And the federal government will make a direct deposit annually, basically a federal match of up to $2,000 into your qualified retirement account. So you can imagine a scenario where somebody has qualified by income, they're saving $2,000 on their own, and the federal government then puts $2,000 also into their account. And that would be every year that they're saving themselves into that qualified retirement account. So another reason to move on this now and to get working on it is to make sure as many Vermonters as possible are in a position to get that federal match starting in 2027.
Representative.
Is that program guaranteed to continue? Starting in 2027, but is it guaranteed to continue, or is that?
There's no sunset, anything. Congress can always, change its mind, but it's not a pilot program or a program with a sunset. It's intended to go on indefinitely, as far as I know.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So as people age, so it looks like from the demographics in your slides, like roughly half the people who initially enrolled are people who are kind of 35 or younger employees, and we assume, based on what you said in Senator Brack, that they're going to get the biggest benefit of having these savings over time because they'll have a longer time for retirement. As they age in their careers and get into jobs that have retirement savings, will these plans kind of exist alongside as a separate savings from employer plans, or do you envision people kind of rolling their IRA from Vermont Saves into other plans as they get older, or will it kind of be up to each individual's?
Yes, so I think, Chair, the most likely scenario would that the Roth IRA would just remain sort of parallel to whatever other retirement plan is offered to them, 401k or pension system or something else. They can continue to contribute to their Roth IRA separate, just they would have to be their money into it, not an automatic payroll deduction. And same thing if an employer, if an employee goes from employer one to employer two, and they're both in this program, their one Roth IRA account would follow from employer one to employer two. It's portable in that way. If they left the state, if they, worked for another employer in Vermont that offered another retirement plan, like we talked about, all of those provide that portability that either it ports up with another employer participating in this plan, or it just exists as a, independent vehicle that they can continue to put money into in the future.
Representatives?
Would the cap on a Roth, like if they move to a job where they get a 401k, would those two caps interfere with each other?
So there'd be separate caps. So you have the IRA cap, it's a little bit higher, like more, it used to be 17,500. It might still be there going up to 22,000, I believe. So that would be one cap, and then you'd have your Roth IRA cap.
On top of that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Maybe just one thing just to mention to the Representative Morgan's question, the 5%, an employee can decide to go higher than the 5% on their own as well. Okay. So if they wanted it to be 10% on their own, they could go in and do that, as well as making it lower. So it's flexible both ways.
Okay.
And then I think the senator mentioned under 5 is not, required to participate in this, but an individual or a small employer can on their own participate in it if they'd like to.
If they choose.
Yeah.
But then just the percentage they would be halted when they hit the cap though.
Yeah.
Obviously, you like the 10%, I was making 70,000, I can't hit 10% because it's going to exceed the.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I had asked legislative council to give us kind of a brief jog through so we can orient ourselves to the bill and then I'll pull the committee, but it seems like there's a lot of support for this one. So I wanted to make sure we had the chance to take it up in the waning days of the session.
Well, I really appreciate
Let's
that.
move it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
So Becky, if you're ready, please join us. Thanks for being here this afternoon.
Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. So I can let me know if you want more detail, but I will give you more of an overview. So this is S-135, which establishes the Vermont Saves program. So this is creating a new chapter in Title III that is adding all the language to administer this program. So there are a number of sections in Section 1 that's adding that new chapter of law that sort of detail all the logistics to creating a new program. So I can generally explain what the sections are. So the new Section 531 in Section 1 on page 1 is the definitions that would relate to this new chapter of law. I would just point you to page 2. This is where there's a definition in subdivision 2 on line 7 for a covered employee as well as a covered employer on line 20. So I think there were some questions over who would be captured by this program. And so this is outlined there. So an employee is someone who is 18 years or older and is employed by a covered employer. It can include a part-time seasonal or temporary employee if that's permitted by the treasurer's office. And then there's some restrictions on what a covered employee does not include. And then with respect to a covered employer, it is, any person or entity in the state, and it can be a for-profit or nonprofit that has not offered to its employee in any time within the current calendar year or 2 preceding calendar years a specified tax-favored retirement plan. So I just wanted to highlight that. This is capturing employers who have not in the last 2 years offered this plan to their employees. Any questions on that?
So we're talking about employees who don't have a retirement plan that's provided by their employer who are 18 or over.
Right, in the last 2 years. Yeah. Okay. And I'm happy to go through more definitions, but if this is the level of detail you want, I can skip to page 5, section 532, which is establishing the program. So that is on line 18 of page 5. So the program is administered by the treasurer's office, and the purpose is stated as increasing financial security for Vermonters by providing access to an IRA for Vermont employees of companies that do not currently offer a retirement savings program. And then there's some language about how the program should be designed. So it's meant to facilitate portability of benefits through withdrawals, rollovers, and direct transfers from an IRA, achieve economies of scale and other efficiencies to minimize costs. So as you've heard, the program requires that a covered employee offer the choice to the covered employee to contribute to the program. So it's a mandatory enrollment, but then the employee can decide to opt out once they've been enrolled in the program. And then in subsection B, it specifies that the type of IRA that is used will be an a Roth IRA, but there is language that allows the treasurer to authorize an option for a traditional IRA to be used instead of a Roth IRA. And then in subsection C, it talks about the contribution. So I'm on the bottom of page 6. So I think you just heard this, but there will be an automatic initial contribution of 5% of the covered employee's salary or wages. But then, of course, the employee can opt out or can choose to contribute at a higher or lower rate. And then on page 7 in subdivision 2 under contributions, the treasurer will also provide for an annual increase of the contribution rate by not less than 1%, but not more than 8% of salary or wages each year. And then, of course, the employee still has the opportunity to opt out of that increase, do more or do less than that amount.
So it starts with a 5% contribution and then phases in up to 1% per year.
Yes.
Representatives.
Is that an automatic, like the first month would be at the increased rate and then they could change it back? Or like, can they say, no, don't make any changes?
So it says it applies to active participants, including participants by default with an option to opt out. So I don't know if the way that the rules would be set up for a program would allow them, sort of give notification and allow them to opt out ahead of time. But perhaps the treasurer's office can answer that question.
For the record, Deputy Treasurer Gavin Hoyles, it would be set up so that the person could opt out before the new elevated contribution rate would kick in for that.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just other things to note on page 7, subdivision 4 says that covered employees are not permitted or required to make contributions under the program. So I just wanted to highlight that. And page 8, under the administration of the program, the treasurer can administer the program through the treasurer's office or contract with a vendor to administer the program and manage the investments. I think you just heard a little about that as well.
First question.
Back to 4, does this limit employee contributions to only those made through their employer, or can they, as being a Roth, make individual contributions into this?
This is limiting the employer from making contributions.
Yeah, but say an employer does a Christmas bonus and says, if you'd like this too.
So my understanding is that if the employer contributes into this plan, then it sort of triggers ERISA
Yeah, it does.
laws. So I think that
And I'm
it's
thinking somebody's going to try to get around the back door and do something different.
I don't know that I can answer how that would be handled, but I think the idea is that the employer should not be making contributions into this account.
But in the example Representative Hooper mentioned, where an employer gives a bonus, it's totally up to the employee. As long as it's the employee's money, they can put money from a bonus.
Right, okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were saying the employer.
It's
Yeah.
directed, like, yeah, no.
So I don't think the employer could, I thought your question was whether an employer could deposit a bonus into the account. And I think the answer is no, but you're saying if somebody receives a bonus, they can decide how they,
Those monies.
want to use that money.
As long as it's the employee's direction of those funds into the account.
And they haven't exceeded the cap.
Yeah. Right.
So, there's language under the administration of the program so that The treasurer has to design and implement the program in a manner that's consistent with federal law. And here's in this language in subdivision 1 on page 8, it says that the program cannot be preempted by, and the payroll deduction IRAs and covered employers not be subject to ERISA. So that goes to that issue that was just raised. The treasurer is tasked with setting up a number of processes and requirements in order to administer the program in subdivision 3. So have to do with enrollment and contributions, automatic enrollment by payroll deduction, processes for participants to make non-payroll contributions to accounts under the program. So that might go to that question that was just raised. So there are a number of, and then also the issue I raised before about determining whether a part-time, seasonal, or temporary employee is a covered employee that's eligible to participate. So the treasurer will be making sort of a number of processes and rules related to setting up this program. Under subsection E, the treasurer has to maintain separate records and accounting for each account under the program, and the participants get to maintain their accounts regardless of the place of employment and roll over funds into other IRAs or other retirement accounts. So it's meant to allow for portability of these retirement funds. Page 10, there's a reporting requirement that the treasurer sends a report to each participant detailing the status of their account. Subsection G, there's some outreach requirements on the treasurer's office. The treasurer will conduct outreach to individuals, employers, and other stakeholders and the public regarding the contents, frequency, timing, and means of required disclosures from the program to employees, participants, and those who are eligible to participate in the program. And subsection H deals with the monies and the participant accounts. So interest, investment earnings, and investment losses are allocated to each individual participant's account. And the participants' benefit under the program is equal to the balance in their account. Let's see. The program assets in subsection I on page 10, the treasurer is authorized to establish a trust account to hold these assets. And none of the assets in the program on page 11 can be transferred to the general fund or any other fund of the state. Subsection J, there is a fee that the treasurer is allowed to charge to defray program costs. The treasurer is authorized to set the amount and method of collection of the fee. However, the fee cannot exceed $30 per participant in each calendar year. And the employer is, no employer is required to fund that fee from the participants. Section 532 on page 11 just sets out the duties of the treasurer for setting up the program. This includes a number of rules that would be adopted to govern the program. The treasurer is also able to enter into different contracts and agreements to administer the program and establish different criteria and guidelines for the program. I feel like I'm rushing through, so I can.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say, given that today was kind of our get a flavor for what this bill does, I think you've done a great job of filling in some of the details and answering some of our questions. I know there will be more. What I wanted to get a flavor from committee was now that we've gotten a little bit of testimony on this and a jog through some of the sections, so you've got a little bit of an understanding of what we're talking about here. Should we try to take some testimony and work on this over the next few days, because it's got to go to money committees if we're going to get out of here this year. I also wanted to get a sense of what I assume the Senate included this in the budget. This might be a question for the deputy treasurer. What the costs are for staffing for the personnel you need.
There's a $750,000 appropriation in the budget.
750,000 for the first year, for this coming fiscal year.
Yeah, it's just one time for staffing and then outreach.
Because the program pays for itself once it's
Exactly.
set up, right?
Is it paid for 2 overtime?
There are actually 3 positions contemplated. We're not sure we need all 3. But
Okay.
Just alone.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Part of the reason I squeezed this in today was that I could sense the excitement about this bill from a few members of this committee and other people, and the treasurer, of course. So I just wanted to make sure we were all we got a chance to take a quick look this week, and then if we can get it, start our work and have Becky back for a real walkthrough with all the gory details and looking at every line, and get some testimony. I think we can accommodate that if we're nimble over the next few days. Representative Byron.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the conversation just a little bit, so this is kind of a continuation of, for newer members, agreement on secure retirement which the legislature passed in, I believe, was it 16? So 17?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, and that was a piece before I got in. I worked with some of the business organizations and I was very enthused about it, but there were some hiccups. And so I was very encouraged to see this get taken back up. So I just want to put an enthusiastic endorsement to work on this on the table.
And I would note, just on the last page of the bill in section 3, there's a repeal section. So what that is doing is repealing that program because this new program may be taking it to.
I would echo what Representative Byron said. We worked for a long time on that Green Mountain thing, and it turned, first it was delayed by the feds, then it was delayed by consultants, then it was delayed by delay. It's time for something like this to happen, because saving rate in the state is abhorrent.
So it sounds like we will be doing a little bit more work on this, getting kind of nods, hands up. Seems like,
great.
all right, sweet. Well, Becky, we'll be seeing you again more this week and next, I imagine. Thank you so much for being on and kind of give us the quick version. I really appreciate that. We have just a ton on our plate right now. With that, we are going to switch gears back to a different section of S17. So sorry about the policy whiplash, a totally different area of our jurisdiction here. So thank you for everybody from the Treasurer's Office for joining us for that. We'll be having it all back.
Thank you. Anything you need?
Thank you. I would like to invite Director Syvret and Christina, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I think, so you had sent us a really great email, but I want to just make sure the committee, was that testimony posted?
I think so.
I think it was. I just haven't had a chance to look ahead. Great.
3 documents.
Been a little all over the place on my screen today. So great. Well, thank you, Executive Director Syvret. If you want to introduce yourself and the Ethics Commission work that you do to us, that would be really fantastic. And then we can talk about the bill as it relates to your office.
Sure, yes. So I'm Christina Syvret. I'm the Executive Director of the State Ethics Commission, and so I've been in that position for about a year and a half. Ethics Commission has been in existence for about 5 years. The big change for us is that last year, a state code of ethics was passed by the General Assembly, signed by the governor, went into effect on July 1st, 2022. So it's relatively new. And so we're in the process of raising awareness about the state code of ethics. And we, at this point in time, mostly provide services and so in the form of advice and guidance for state of Vermont employees and public servants. And so I think an important point to note here is that state of Vermont public servants does not include just state of Vermont employees, but also includes other categories of public servants, such as board and commission members and volunteers. And I believe my colleague, TJ Jones, is also going to be joining us a little later, so I might as well give a brief introduction. So he's a consultant. He worked for the commission for longer than I've been here. He's appeared before the House and Senate Government Operations Committee on numerous occasions, and he's the former state ethics prosecutor for Connecticut for 10 years. He's currently a professor, but he, in his role as the state ethics prosecutor, went through issues related to sheriff reform in the state of Connecticut many years ago. And so he has also the ability to kind of give comparative examples if anyone has any questions about how things went in Connecticut. So apparently there are very similar issues and similar solutions. So hopefully he'll be joining us soon. So I will admit that I have not been following this bill very closely. So I've tried to get myself up to speed in the last couple of days. I don't know if anybody has any questions about the Ethics Commission, if I went too fast there, if I missed anything.
So a couple of us were on GovOps last year, and we're here for the adoption of the State Code of Ethics. And but many of the members are new to the legislature or new to GovOps. So there might be questions. I also just did want to preface your testimony with a little bit of an apology that the suggestion of having, instead of a separate conflict of interest, bringing sheriffs, the Office of Sheriff, under the State Code of Ethics explicitly kind of came from a bit of testimony, and you referenced Senator White. I think it kind of started there, and then other folks said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, so that it's all one thing, we're not reinventing the wheel. Thought maybe we should have you in and ask for your feedback on that. So sorry to bring you in to this bill that you weren't in part of the discussion of, but I think it may be a great opportunity. So interested to see how you feel about that.
No, and I'm glad you did. And I guess I should go back a little bit more to what the Ethics Commission does. So we provide advice and guidance. We can provide confidential advice, over the phone, over email, and we also provide formal advisory opinions. So those are for more complicated questions or questions that we think are going to come up repeatedly. And so those are posted on our website, and the full commission, reads through those and approves those before those happen. And we also have the ability to receive but not investigate complaints. So we can receive complaints from any source, not just State of Vermont public servants, but also members of the public. We review those complaints for sufficiency, and then the statute lays out different ways that we can refer the complaint on. For example, if it relates to criminal behavior, we refer it to the Attorney General's office. If it relates to a violation of DHR Policy and Procedures Manual, we refer it to the Commissioner for Human Resources. Or that's an example of what we do. And so, yes, I'm glad you had me in, because I do think that the idea that the State Code of Ethics, which was a long time in the making, it was very hotly debated and researched, and we think it is a good code of ethics. We do think that it should apply to pretty much all categories of public service in Vermont. We're looking for consistency, we're looking for parity, we're looking for a clear understanding of the expectations around ethics. And so when this issue came up, it did raise a question in my mind as to whether the State Code of Ethics already covers some categories of sheriffs and deputy sheriffs. And I do believe that former Senator White also raised this issue. And so we did not have time to fully research the question and come up with an answer, but we do think that there is a pretty persuasive argument that at least in some situations, it does already cover some categories of sheriffs and some categories of deputy sheriffs, depending on who's paying them and what services they're providing and what the relationship is to the state. And so I think that's an important flag here, because I did notice that there was previously a definition of conflict of interest that did not line up with the State Code of Ethics. And so I do think if you're going to move forward with an alternative definition of conflicts of interest that was specific to sheriffs, you might inadvertently be setting up a parallel system where you have two standards that are in place that apply to not only, public, the same category public official, but, somebody in the same position in the same profession. And that's something that I think everyone can agree should be avoided. And especially because I think the alternative definition of conflict of interest that was proposed was a weaker definition of conflict of interest. And so the statute does allow the ability for agencies and different branches of government to institute higher standards, but not lower standards. And of course, this would be two different statutes, so we're not in the exact same situation. You're not adopting this by policy. But at the same time, I think the intent in passing the State Code of Ethics was clear that you can create higher standards. The State Code of Ethics is supposed to be a baseline, so you shouldn't be going below that.
Just to be clear, the sort of novel conflict of interest that was in S17 as it passed the Senate is a weaker conflict of interest definition than the one that is in the State Code.
We believe so, yeah. Yeah. And I don't think the intent there was to look for a weaker definition of conflict of interest because you are looking for accountability. So, yeah, so our recommendation would be actually to look at the state code of ethics and have it applied to all sheriffs and deputies. And I think this was also agreed upon by the Department of Attorneys, State's attorneys and sheriffs. And so I did look through some of their prior testimony, and they brought up some issues that they felt should be looked at or reconciled here. So one of those was, outside employment, moonlighting work. So the state code of ethics does cover that situation. There are rules in place, and they proposed, or John Campbell at one point proposed, that if a sheriff or deputy sheriff was interested in engaging in outside employment, then they would provide a detailed written statement to the state auditor and the State Ethics Commission for consideration for any potential conflicts of interest. So bringing deputy sheriffs and sheriffs under the state code of ethics, dispositively, saying that they are covered by that would give them the ability to request advice from the commission. Whereas I think right now would be unclear, and not every sheriff and not every deputy sheriff would have that ability if they aren't considered to be covered by the state code of ethics. And that would give us the ability to give them an opinion if they requested one. And also, I think Director Campbell raised whistleblower protections, which is also included in the state code of ethics. So that would bring, by covering sheriffs and deputy sheriffs and the state code of ethics, that would cover a lot of other issues, not just conflict of interest. So I think there's two ways you can move forward here. I think one would be to research whether state code of ethics already covers some categories of sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, or you could say the preferred path forward is just to say that yes, it does, and include that in your language here. And so when we're talking about conflict of interest, I think one thing that we had flagged was that there's nothing in the bill as it is that relates to financial disclosure requirements that are closely related to conflict of interest. And so right now, candidates for legislature, statewide office, and also executive officers have, financial disclosure forms they either have to file when they're running for office, or in the case of executive officer financial disclosures, they have to file those annually. And so we strongly feel that that's something worth considering. And there is language in the Senate at the moment related to implementing penalties for candidates who fail to file their financial disclosures, as well as executive officers. So there is language related to financial disclosures being considered at this moment. And due to its close tie-in with conflicts of interest, we do think that would be something to consider when it comes to sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, if you want to give the public the ability to identify financial conflicts for themselves. So, and I did submit, I think it's a 50-state chart, along with the testimony that we developed for different purposes. However, it does give you an overview and gives you a sense that there is precedent for having county elected officials file disclosures. So this wouldn't be a novel idea. I think there are two ways that you could have someone file a financial disclosure. So one would be as a candidate, and then also you can consider, if you were looking for an annual financial disclosure requirement, they could always file them with the Ethics Commission along with executive officers. I think there's a pretty small number of sheriffs, 14 if I am correct. And so we could handle filing at our end and the posting of that information if that's something you plan to consider.
And that the annual disclosures for executive officers, about how many of those are throughout the state?
Approximately 80 something. Yeah. And I think that would be if you're interested in an annual financial disclosure, which I think is the preferred, but then also as a candidate, I think the executive officer annual filing disclosure requirements are related to the candidate filing disclosure requirements in the sense that you're identifying conflicts of interest, but the public can use them for different purposes, right? So you're looking at the entire candidate. When you're looking at a candidate financial disclosure, you're saying like, who's this person? Where do their allegiances lie? And so they're used in similar ways, but also slightly different ways in the sense of like, what is the person who's reading the form trying to evaluate here? And they're also useful for the person who's filing the form, because often if you're new to government service, that is your first, experience with ethics, and it helps the person identify conflicts of interest for themselves as they're breaking down their own financial interests. So, and I will say that the financial disclosure form that candidates and executive officers have to file is the same form. I included a copy of it in my testimony. It is very modest compared to other states. And so you may want to consider changing the form if you wanted to go with that as a model to address, the specific issues you're looking at when it comes to sheriffs. All right. So I guess I should move on to the specific comments about the language, unless you have any questions.
So I wanted to invite the committee, especially since there are folks who weren't around here for the last couple of years while we were doing the state code of ethics and talking about some of these issues in detail and how they have applied to various officers. And there's, we can and should do a much deeper dive into that work to bring this committee up to speed. And I think that there's a lot of interest in the public, and I'll acknowledge that there have been some stories about how accessible and how thorough our legislative and executive financial disclosures are. And so I think that this is a topic that we're going to be returning to in a broader sense in the future. But are there any kind of general questions? One thing that I thought might be useful for some folks is that you mentioned that there are certain types of complex questions that people ask you for advice. I thought a couple of examples of where people kind of go to the ethics commission and go, am I okay here? Or am I violating policy? If you might share a couple of those, it might give folks who are new to this a sense of sort of what are the questions that people have that are thorny in this area.
Sure. And so we do have one advisory opinion that's been posted. So we're working on a couple of others, but it's related to questions that have come up here related to outside employment. So if I were to engage in outside employment, I'm a state employee. This is my proposal. This is what I plan on doing. Is this incompatible with my state of Vermont, position? And so then going into a detailed analysis of, because when you're looking at outside employment, it brings in misuse of position, misuse of resources, preferential treatment, conflict of interest. And so you kind of go through an analysis under the state code of ethics, any issues that might arise in your outside employment. And then we would say, you're clear here, you're not clear here. If you take this course of action, be clear. If you take another course of action, you could be opening yourself up to a complaint. And that's the type of advice that we provide. So questions about outside employment, misuse of position, preferential treatment, and conflicts of interest are generally the questions that we get within our office.
Any general questions for Director Sivert before we dive into recommendations? It's going to be a big week here. So if you think of anything. All right, go ahead. Yeah. Please go ahead.
And I apologize. I know that I speak quickly, so I try and put my thoughts down.
I love it.
Yes. Yes. So I won't read through, I think, the statutory language. I'll just give you my comments on the language. So we did make the suggestion that when you are talking, you include in the definition of conflict of interest that the Ethics Commission suggests the underlined language, which you can, find here. And it looks like the underlining didn't come out, but we suggest you add a sentence that says sheriffs and deputy sheriffs are considered public servants for the purposes of 3 VSA section 12021, which just makes it clear that sheriffs do fall under the code of ethics, and so that everything in the code of ethics applies to sheriffs and deputy sheriffs. We also noted that there is kind of an addition to the definition of conflict of interest. Even though you're falling back on the state code of ethics as your baseline, there's an addition in the sense that you're bringing in, I think, outside organizations into the mix. And so would just suggest changing some of the wording here just to make it in line with what is already in the state code of ethics. So those are pretty minor changes. Adding the word also just to highlight that this is, a slightly different but higher requirement. And we also would suggest that since you're bringing in, organizations of which the sheriff or deputy sheriff is affiliated, just be further defined for clarity. And so we do think that this would relate to a financial disclosure requirement in the sense that you could require the sheriff or deputy sheriff to disclose those organizations of which they're affiliated on their financial disclosure form. And then that's going to be very clear when you're discussing conflicts of interest, exactly what those organizations are. All right. And so moving on, it does look like a higher standard is being created in this bill when it comes to recusal for conflict of interest. So if you look at the state code of ethics, we do have scenarios because it is a broader definition of conflict of interest that brings in, more situations. So we look at scenarios where somebody might be able to move forward, even though they have a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest. And that can be when an action is purely administrative. It's a de minimis action where there's no one else who could literally do it. And so we have a procedure that's set out in the code of ethics where if that is the case, then you file a disclosure form that says, I recognize that there's an appearance of a conflict of interest or appearance or an actual conflict of interest, but I believe I can be impartial and move forward. And that's something that's going to be available to members of the public to see. That's not explicit in the state code of ethics, but you're supposed to write the disclosure in a way that a member of the public could understand it. So that is implied. And so it looks like here you're taking away that option, which is, perfectly acceptable. But I would just make clarifying language here that says, once you identified a conflict of interest, you must recuse yourself. That's how I read this. So I would clarify that that is a departure from the state code of ethics that's creating a higher standard. And, of course, that can be reconsidered in light of the state code of ethics having, a broader definition of conflict of interest that may bring in more scenarios that you're not thinking about here.
So, and you're referring specifically to section 4, which is 314B, sheriff or deputy sheriff shall avoid any conflict of interest or appearance.
And then it's directing them, they have to recuse themselves from the matter and take no further action. So it's.
Yes. And so this is a stricter standard. So generally speaking, under the state code of ethics, you have the option of moving forward, but you need to file a disclosure form saying you've identified a conflict of interest or the appearance of conflict of interest, but you think there's good cause as to why you can move forward. So say, for example, you're in charge of, assigning cases to someone and it is solely based on, alphabetical order. Somebody, close friend of yours comes in and you are only going by alphabetical order as to who you assign that case to. You're not choosing somebody who you think will give your friend a more favorable result. There's no possible way that you can deviate from what is in front of you. And you're the only person in your office that could actually do this. You can say, okay, I recognize that someone could say that I'm assigning, this case to, investigator or someone who's going to act more favorably for my friend. People know this is my friend. However, there's policy, this procedure is in place. I cannot deviate from it. There's no one else to do this. So therefore, I recognize this could be perceived as a conflict of interest. I'm going to file a conflict of interest form. And then if somebody wants to see it, then they'll know that I have acknowledged this and that, we've set a course of action in place to make sure that, a conflict of interest, the perception of conflict of interest exists. However, in reality, in engaging in these duties, I am not giving someone preferential treatment. So that would be an example of where you would do that. And so this does appear to take away that option, which is, perfectly acceptable. It just is a deviation from the state code of ethics. So, okay, next section would be related to filing complaints with the state ethics commission. And so currently our feeling is that you can bring sheriffs and deputy sheriffs in under the state code of ethics, and that is what the above comments related to. And that would give them the ability to ask for advice and guidance from us. However, we still would not have the ability to accept complaints from any source. So the state code of ethics 3 BSA section 1223 would need to be amended because at this point in time, it says the state code of ethics can accept complaints related to 3 branches of government. So I do think that you need clarifying language that says would include sheriffs in that mix. And then that would give, make the ethics commission, fully encompass and fully have jurisdiction over sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, and to the same extent that it already does with other state public servants. So let me see. Yes, and I think that the big question in the room is that we do have the ability to receive complaints, but we do not have independent investigatory or enforcement powers. And so we would need a place to refer complaints to. And so, as I mentioned, for example, if it alleged criminal behavior, we would be referring it to the Attorney General's office or a state's attorney's office. If it's more, routine, like a policy violation, somebody is alleging misuse of funds, we would need we would need to specify where we'd be referring those complaints to. I will say, as a preview for next year, we will be asking for investigatory and enforcement powers for the Ethics Commission. So it is conceivable that the Ethics Commission could, in the near future, become the right place to handle certain types of investigations, certainly. Because we do feel like Vermont should take a holistic approach to ethics and not a piecemeal approach, like just, looking at sheriffs through this process, looking through, somebody who works for, the Agency of Transportation, another process. We do think there should be one independent agency that's looking into all of these, and it should be done independently. So, but at this moment in time, we do not have a path for that. So that would also need to be addressed. And I think the last comment was the definition of confidential information. And we just suggested, changing that to be in line with the code of ethics. I think there's just a couple of language changes there that were minor.
Great. This memo, I just want to say, is really, really useful with clear and specific suggestions for how we could improve the language. So I very much appreciate that. Do you folks have any questions for Director Siebert about what we've heard so far?
I don't have a question for her. I have a question for her.
Just for us generally, as it relates to these ethics recommendations? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering why we didn't align with the state's definition.
So the bill that came over, so backing up to the general context of how we got involved with the Ethics Commission in this bill. So you'll recall that when S-17 came over to us from the Senate, it developed a whole new conflict of interest policy. And we heard several folks in testimony a week or two ago basically say, why don't you just pull sheriffs in under the State Ethics Commission? And everybody kind of went, oh, okay, and kind of got the nods from the committee. So in the subsequent draft here, I went ahead and dropped language with the support from Legislative Council to try to get at that. And it's pretty clear that we, in our attempt to make the Senate bill and this bill be not reinvent the wheel, that we actually did deviate a little bit. So we were heading in that direction with the subsequent drafts, but the original Senate as passed was like a completely novel, different conflict of interest policy. And it seemed like most of our witnesses were like, that really might not make the most sense. We might want to just use the ones we're all agreed on. And I think the other benefit of that, and Director Siebert can feel free to disagree with me because you're the expert, but then as we update the code, sheriffs get pulled along as being covered by that code, as opposed to having a completely separate thing stuck that we would have to change the law again in order to sort of capture any new, authority or application of the state code. So.
Correct. And I'll also flag that there's language, the Senate now regarding municipal ethics and the possibility that the Ethics Commission will be coming forward with a proposal next year on how to address municipal ethics on the state level. And presumably within the proposal, there would be a complaint process, or proposal for complaint process. And so I'm just bringing that here because it could be, quite possible that next year there'd be more than one option on how to work with the complaint process when it comes to both municipal officials, which could include county officials in that, or on the state level with the state ethics commission. So, but yes, I fully agree that is the advantage of, having everything under in one place. Is that when that gets updated, the updates apply to everyone. And I do think that Senator.
Sorry, thank you. So other than this bill, which would spell out sheriffs, are there other statutes that spell out particular elected officials for having to follow the state ethics code?
In addition to, this would be the first case of going outside of state employment. And so I think the case for bringing this in is, number one, just having, I think Vermont is moving forward in a path that is looking to address ethics holistically within the state. But to bring up the point that, former Senator Jeanette White raised, there is a strong argument that some sheriffs and deputy sheriffs could already be considered state of Vermont employees under the state code of ethics definition of public servant. So there is already some overlap there. I personally feel there's a strong case that there is. And so this would kind of be a way to ameliorate what could potentially become a messy situation when you're discussing what standards apply to who the sheriff, yes, this other sheriff, no, it could get quite complicated.
I guess my question was other types of elected positions.
Well, anyone who's an elected position within the state, so all legislators, for example, statewide elected officials. So yes, when you talk about municipal elected officials, no. When you talk about county officials, no. And so the argument, I think, for bringing in sheriffs under the code fully would be because there is an argument, well, number one, just for, parity, but the argument that some of them are already covered by it. And that is something that would require some research to determine, where people landed. I do think there's a strong argument for it because it does seem like some sheriffs and deputy sheriffs are paid by the state while they are engaged in duties for the state.
So that would make sense to me, but like if I know we have very few county officials in the state of Vermont, but other county officials are not spelled out as having to follow the same code of ethics.
Judges, yes.
They are. Okay, I guess.
And I think the only category left would be high bailiffs.
Okay.
So they would be the ones that would be left out.
Yeah, I guess the question would be like the assistant judges, for instance, who are county officials and they're, set out in the Constitution. Are they covered right now?
That's, yeah.
Ambiguous probably in the same way that it is with sheriffs.
I would say last year when the discussion came up that they were discussed, and my understanding is that they would, as employees of as members of the judicial branch, but I see Terry Corson here, so maybe she would want to weigh in, but yes, I would say yes. I will note that I believe TJ is here too, and so I think he could also weigh in because he was involved in those conversations as well last year. Maybe he has some additional recollections. He could also weigh in.
Before we go to TJ, I might, if Terry's willing, do you want to weigh in on that while we're on this particular question?
Terry Purcell, state coordinator. I was involved in those negotiations, I guess, in a different capacity. But executive director said that there is a judicial code of ethics that does apply to assistant judges, and I believe that there was a acknowledgement that the state code of ethics would apply to the extent that there wasn't an inconsistency between the judicial code of ethics and the state code of ethics. And if so, that's my correct recollection.
I remember us going around and around and around trying to make it so that we weren't sort of undermining the existing judicial code of ethics. Now that you bring that up, it sparks my memory from when we were talking about this 2 years ago. So yes. That sounds like we tried to square the two codes, the state code and the judicial code.
And that judicial code applies to assistant judges?
Sounds like all judges, right?
The judicial code of ethics does apply to assistant judges.
Just assistant judges?
Oh, not just to assistant judges.
Including
all judicial officers.
Yes, yeah, that's correct, as does the state code of ethics. And so therefore that would go back to the original discussion about creating a higher standard versus creating a lower standard. So when there's a lower standard in place and the state code of ethics creates a higher standard, the higher standard applies. If there's a policy or rule in place that requires a higher standard, then that standard is going to apply. So you're always looking at what is the higher standard of ethical behavior. And so, it depends on it's a fact-based situation, but yes.
Clear as mud. Thank you.
Well, so we'll do more work, I imagine, on ethics, as the executive director said. But the idea is that the state code of ethics can apply broadly and is essentially it has standards, and then there are professional standards like the judicial standards that apply to judges that can oftentimes be more stringent, and the law, as I'm hearing both Terry and Executive Director Sivert explain it, is just that in the situation, depending on the person's position and the facts, the more stringent code applies, whichever one in that situation or the pieces covering it.
Okay, so I understand that. I just don't understand the who is covered by the state code of ethics in the county.
So it'd be judges. We think there's an argument that some categories of sheriffs and deputy sheriffs are already covered. Some of them would not be if they are paid by the county and they're not, performing work for the state, then that would be a separate category. So at the moment we would say judges, some sheriffs, some deputy sheriffs, but not all of them, and not high bailiffs.
So I'd like to welcome TJ, who's with us via Zoom. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
I thought he was a singer. Do you get that a lot? Never. Thanks for being with us and offering your perspective on S17 and this application of the state code of ethics to sheriffs potentially.
Sure. And I'm happy to provide any information the committee wants. I anticipated the committee would want to hear whether and how much the sheriffs were brought up during the initial discussions on the code of ethics. And my best recollection is that really they were not the focus, and I don't recall them or any county employees coming up in the conversation. But I'm also here if the committee wants. Connecticut has a unique trajectory with respect to ethics and sheriffs. And I'm also happy to share that and my experience with that.
That'd be great. And if you could, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself and should have asked you to introduce yourself and your role with the Ethics Commission for the record.
Absolutely. My name's Thomas Jones. People usually call me TJ. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut, but I also consult on ethics issues with local and state governments and also corporations. And I'm here on behalf of the commission. I've had an on and off relationship with the commission since they began the pursuit of filling in the office right after the original bill was passed. So I do have somewhat of a off and on history with the commission. I guess I'm the institutional knowledge.
He does serve that role.
Well, I am definitely interested in both of the two pieces that you brought up, and I think the committee would be interested to hear how the sheriffs kind of fit in. I think on many aspects of our exploration of the Office of Sheriff, we found that their role hasn't been completely defined in the Constitution and has sort of just evolved on its own over time as we've asked them to do and perform different functions. And so it would be great to understand it if they were considered at all in the original founding, and how unusual or usual it is to sort of bring them up into the state code of ethics for our neighboring states.
Sure, and I can speak to that. Vermont's unique in a lot of ways, but one way that the state is not unique is that most states have constitutional provisions relating to sheriffs. And that has to do with the long history, particularly of New England states and law enforcement, because at the inception of the New England states, there really wasn't any law enforcement other than a sheriff, which is a vestige of the old English system going back 1,000 years. So sheriffs have been here from the beginning for all New England states, and they are, except with, I think, the case of Rhode Island, they're all hard baked into the constitutions. But the problems that arise or are arising in Vermont are not unique either, in that each of the states, particularly in New England, has had issues grappling with how to bring accountability to sheriffs, particularly because in most of New England, there is no meaningful county government anymore. And so there's saddled with this vestige of the past and trying to figure out how that incorporates into the new state society. In the situation of Connecticut, Connecticut is unique in that it's the only state among the 50 that had, by constitutional amendment, done away with sheriffs. And they did this in the year 2000. Now, the reason that they did away with sheriffs, and they had to do it by constitutional amendment, was this issue of accountability. And the catalyzing issues were threefold. The first was that the sheriffs were fee splitting. Fees were set by the state, and the sheriffs would deputize their deputies, but then charge the deputies a certain fee for every time the deputy affected, say, service. So this was largely deemed a kickback that the state was not very happy about. The second issue was the cross hiring of relatives, this sort of cross nepotism where the high sheriff in one county would hire the son of the high sheriff of another county, and in exchange, that high sheriff would hire some relative of the other. And this was obviously frowned on by the state. The final was the big issue that led to the constitutional amendment was all the sheriffs were members of the state's sheriff association, and the sheriff association was run by a sheriff by design. And the sheriff who runs the sheriff association was able to have a lot of perks, including club membership, free mileage, housing. And what came to pass is the head sheriff of the Sheriff's Association began making it a requirement in order to be deputized that deputies become members of the association for quite a bit of money. And that money was used to pay for the high sheriff's position at the Sheriff's Association, which was loaded with perks. And the high sheriff at the time ended up going to prison because of that. And that, of course, led to all kinds of concern around the state and ultimately the constitutional amendment. In the journey to the constitutional amendment, the state put the sheriffs under the code of ethics for the state. And putting them under the code of ethics was one of the things that hastened the demise of sheriffs, because all of a sudden there was accountability on the sheriffs. And investigations opened up, complaints were made. And as I say, that became newsworthy and hastened the demise of that constitutional provision.
So I just wanted to say that I doubt that the director of the Sheriff's Association in Vermont is experiencing the same things, but we may. He's sitting in the room here, TJ. So I just wanted to acknowledge that maybe the experience in Vermont here, as it is so often, is a little different than it was in Connecticut.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like the bringing the sheriffs up under the state code of ethics did, provide a layer of accountability that wasn't there before, and that so you'd largely be supportive of the effort that we're making here to have the sheriffs covered.
And from a drafting perspective, the way that Connecticut did that was they just added the sheriffs to the then Ethics Commission's governing statute. If you're familiar with Connecticut, the existing ethics office now is new as of 2005, when the old commission was disbanded for a variety of reasons.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I might add to, as TJ mentioned, he said that it brought out a lot of issues once they put in the state code of ethics. So one element that I didn't mention is there's a training requirement under the state code of ethics to be trained in the state code of ethics. And then the ethics commission would then become a resource for sheriffs if they needed advice or guidance. And so right now we have an online training that's available, but you can always request in-person trainings from us on specific topics. So we'd always be happy to set up, a meeting with the sheriffs online in person to review the expectations under the state code of ethics to ensure that, behaviors that might get you in trouble, you might not, be clear to you, but we can help clear the way and make sure that there's a consistent understanding of the type of behavior that is expected under the state code of ethics.
Elsewhere in the bill, we're contemplating having sort of a supportive staff member. In the current draft, it's the deputy director. I had received some suggestion today that it potentially be a director of operations. But regardless of what we call that new staff person that we're considering, sounds like maybe this would be another thing for them to facilitate. We've specified in there that one of the things that they would do would be to assist in complying with a model policy around financial compensation, benefits, financial management of the office. So it sounds like ethics could be another addition to what they can support the sheriffs in having consistent compliance and training.
Yeah. So under the state code of ethics, there are only, I think, 4 approved training providers. So unfortunately, unless they're an approved training provider, they could not do that. And that is to encourage consistency and the understanding of the state code of ethics. But we would always be happy to provide any training or consider other options for, approving other training providers as well.
Okay, that is a great point. Cool. So I won't get too far out over my skis with trying to make that new position have to be an ethics expert.
Yeah. I think just when it comes to the actual state code of ethics itself, so that's a specific requirement there, but clearly there are a lot of other issues that, will come up that are not related specifically to the state code of ethics.
Is there anything else that you or TJ would like us to know before we,
No, I think that, I think the two things that kind of stood out for me were definitely the fact that, some sheriff's deputies can already be covered under the state code of ethics. And I think that is a strong argument for bringing them in, completely and not, adopting a separate definition of conflict of interest. And also, I think it sounds like maybe the financial disclosure requirements have not previously maybe been thought of or discussed. And so we do think that would be an important element to address within the conflicts of interest section, whether the language is addressed here or elsewhere. But I think that is, that is something that's important and in line with what other states do when you're talking about county elected officials.
Well, thank you very much, TJ, and thank you, Executive Director Sivert, for joining us today. That was really helpful in confirming that we weren't going on a crazy track with trying to bring the sheriffs up under the state code. And I really appreciate the suggestions. We'll try to work with Legislative Council and you offline if we have questions about incorporating some of those recommendations. But the memo is really helpful for us to get those in.
All right. Always available if you have further questions. So thank you.
Very, very much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. So committee, we are going to be picking our work back up on this tomorrow morning. I am wondering if there's any hesitation about me including some of the recommendations from the memo in the upcoming draft. And I had talked during our previous break, both with VSEA folks and with Terry and others about adding explicitly the Sheriff's Association, VSEA to that reporting requirement or the report back in 7A. It seemed like there was consensus around that, but from what we've heard today, it sounds like on both of these, we're kind of on the right track with a few additional tweaks, but just wanted the committee to have an opportunity to flag any issues if there are any. Yeah, Representative Hango, please.
Thank you. I'm still trying to, I guess my notes were on the previous draft, so it's really hard to kind of follow the math here. So I had some notes about the transport of juveniles, needing to hear from DCF if this is the appropriate place, or if we need to put some other provisions in because it's transportation of juveniles. I think that's section 5D. The other thing that I wanted to hear from is the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs on this new position that we're creating. And specifically, I'm concerned that the position is going to be funded, according to what we have written in this bill, by a charge assessed to the Sheriff's Department. And we've heard that they're struggling financially. So I don't know what kind of funding method we could go forward with, but I think Rep. Chase had asked me last week, well, what was I envisioning? And I said, well, if the state, I would prefer it being a state budget, but if it had to be the departments of the sheriff departments, it should be proportional to what they're bringing in terms of revenue, I would think.
While we're on that, the department was going to come in today, and they had a conflict that they couldn't come in and testify. So I did have that one down. And I, in light of them not being able to be here, I emailed John and Annie, and I said, there's been some talk about this. I had said online, we probably need to fix that section and figure out where this money is really going to come from and how. I'd like to ask them about it. There was, in part of the negotiations from a previous contract, there was an exempt position created that isn't filled right now. It sounds like I just found this out in emails from them because I had some questions for them and I was hoping to ask on the record. And so it sounds like there may be a position that's not completely defined yet, but that's already been approved in their office that could become this new either deputy director or director of operations. So when we have them in, whether it's tomorrow or we extend this into Thursday, I think that may solve the problem if that really is a viable path. And then we can get rid of the 5C, be charge assessed and just say, it's going to be this position that's already been approved, but it's going to have this title and it's going to do this work. That may help resolve that question. So I've been behind the scenes trying to find that path, was hoping we could hear from the department today, but just the timing didn't work out. So we'll get them back in on that. On the juvenile transport, I apologize. I had kind of forgotten about that one. But that's, we're really talking about juveniles. And let me,
I mean, it's just so specifically spelled out that I think we need to address that because we're not really qualified to talk about anything in the DCF purview, in my opinion.
yeah, I think that language is definitely not something that came from any legislator. It was a recommendation, I think, that came in that memo from the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, but I'm going to try and find the reference for that.
So that would be good to have them speak on that as well. And the section on the audits, it doesn't appear in this draft, but there also are, I don't know, there's a heading that says audits, but then it doesn't say anything. It says section 2 is amended to read, and then it just goes into the county sheriff's department. So I'm not sure where audits went. And that might be a question for Tim. That's on page 1 at the bottom.
Page 2 now, bottom of page 2 on the new one.
Yeah,
Am I on the wrong draft? Sorry.
yeah, we're looking at 2.2.
That bottom of page 2 is.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
on
then the
page
top-
1.
Then on the top of page 3.
I'm on the top of page, bottom of page 1.
Go all the way, go right there. That's-
Yeah, I think I see where, I think you're in the right spot.
It says
So,
audit at the bottom of page 1.
Oh,
And then it goes
yeah,
into
yeah,
section 2,
okay, yeah.
which doesn't appear to have anything to
Did
do
I get
with
accidentally put in
audits. It does.
would you mind helping us out here? Because I think this very much does have to do with audits, but I don't want to have to explain it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
For the record, Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. So there are two sections that pertain to audits, in sections 2 and 3 of the bill.
So I was looking at section 2.
And section 2 is modified. This is what I was speaking to this morning about, which is kind of a general rewrite of the audits, the language pertaining to audits in the transitionary period.
Okay,
Between sheriffs.
When a sheriff announces they'll
okay.
be leaving office in one.
Yep, I can read
So
that
that's all
like
right.
that. That's
That makes sense.
fine. Then the section 3 audits are what triggers an annual audit? Is that what that one is?
Let's see.
No, this is the
No.
establishment of any special groups that the sheriff or their employees
So
will.
that's the number 9.
Yes, yep.
So really important. And I think we, Representative Mrowicki had brought up a question about 10C. And I had asked the auditor about this, and I think that Deputy Auditor Ash sent us an email that I can forward. He sent me an email today, actually at 9:32 a.m. I'm seeing, to try to answer a question about this, which I I think was meant to be forwarded to the committee and I just didn't get around to it. I apologize. Things are moving fast around here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what this is trying to get at, I just don't know how it's getting there because it says the auditor shall charge for any associated costs in the same manner described in 32 VSA 168B, which doesn't tell me a lot until I look it up.
Tim, could you maybe, my understanding is that this section is just basically the auditor can charge the sheriffs for the audits. And then to the email that I just forwarded from Deputy Auditor Ash that he sent this morning, it looks like the question was that Representative Murwicki had asked that I think was really on point was, are we setting up a situation by giving this flexibility about audits where there's still going to be lots and lots of charges that sheriff's departments can't afford? Mm-hmm. And in fact, what this language attempts to do is actually the reverse of that by giving the auditor some more flexibility and for them to not have to perform the full audit that they do every other year. If they've just performed it, that they could do something that was more cursory. And so what Deputy Auditor Ash said was that the full audits that they do every other year, that their contract is $6,350. And that, so if they had to do, a full audit, again, they would be doing that chargeback for $6,300. He gave me the example when I asked him about this, and I don't think he references this in this informational email that he sent us, but we can have him back if you want to talk to him. I think that the example he gave was that there was basically, it was less than $1,000 that in staff time to do the review that led to the recommendations around the Caledonia bonus issue. And, that they didn't, they actually don't use their authority and charge back in those cases. So sort of worst case scenario, if they feel like they have to exercise this discretion, they're talking about a $6,300 audit charge. And I believe Sheriff Anderson might have a different interpretation of this, but.
I think we're actually, for the record, Mark Anderson, Vermont Sheriff's Association, I think we're okay with the auditor's language as written. We've raised a concern that this is the opportunity an auditor could come in and say, we're going to assign a CPA for the next year to watch you because we just don't trust you. And as written, you're required to pay that cost. It's not to suggest that our current auditor is doing that or is going to do that. It's just we saw it as a bit of an open door. So that was what we raised, but we're okay with the auditor's language, noting that if that happened, we're going to be coming here to ask for reprieve.
Does that satisfy your concern, Representative Hango?
I think so. I really don't, because I couldn't reference the same line because the bill drafts are now changed and the line numbers are different. I'm not really sure where I was going with my notes from last Friday, unfortunately.
And no longer. I think we all kind of saw this and we're saying, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Are we opening up every sheriff to these really expensive audits? So that, and Representative Murwicki had some really pointed questions, and I think that the combination of that reassurance from Sheriff Anderson and this piece does it for me. Yes. Annie may be able to help us with that previous question about juvenile transport. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate that. Annie, can you hear us?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. I just clicked on a bit ago and I heard two of the questions that were being asked, Representative Hango asked about the position, which would be like a director of operations. It is correct. We do have a position available that is in the budget currently, not filled. It was originally held out when the bargaining unit was formed, and it was originally contemplated as a transportation fight manager. But realistically, the needs of the sheriff have grown since we originally contemplated what that position would look like. A director of operations could in fact do many of the things that you're talking about, which would be assist with policy and making sure the sheriffs are all following similar financial obligations, all of the things that getting them the ethics training, setting those things up, overseeing how transports are going. And it would not require an assessment to the sheriff's offices. We have the money in the budget for a position, and I think we would be able to use that position. It's vacant right now. We would be able to fill that, and it's already budgeted. So I think that would alleviate any issue of how would you assess to each sheriff's departments, the small ones versus the large ones. So I think we could absolutely do that. And I could stop and take a question if anybody has any on that.
Great, thank you. So there's an existing exempt position. We could rename it the Director of Operations from the Deputy Director that's labeled in this bill. Help us establish some of those functions, and it's money that's already budgeted, but there isn't a person that's doing that transport oversight role today.
Correct.
Sometimes it's just things kind of fall together, and I really appreciate your office making that happen, Annie.
We could do that. The other question that was asked about was why was that language on juveniles added? And realistically, it was for clarity, because right now the state transport deputies do transport juveniles who are brought in for court. Sometimes the judge might, for example, send them to Brattleboro Retreat or to some other program where they, generally speaking, that's where the transports go. But and there is a section of the statute that referred to the transportation of, I think it said prisoners, persons with mental health issues, and it didn't reference juveniles. So it was confusing in the statute that one section of the statute actually acknowledged the sheriff's work with the court transports for juveniles, but it wasn't in both places. So we were just trying to be clear that the court ordered transports of juveniles, and maybe Sheriff Anderson could speak on this, but we saw it in one section of the statute. It wasn't in both sections of the statute. We were just trying to be consistent. So, and I do know that DCF has contracts with sheriffs for other types of work with juveniles, and maybe even other types of transports, and maybe Sheriff Anderson could comment on that. But it wasn't critical, Representative Hango. We were just looking at two sections of the statute that didn't line up. And I think there might have been a third question on audits that I missed when I was trying to click into this.
I think we cleared that one up.
Yeah, I think we did clear that one up.
Thank you.
This brief testimony has helped enormously inform what I hope will be the ultimate or penultimate draft.
Okay.
So I really appreciate you coming in.
I did have one other, if I could ask a question, and maybe it is regard to the piece on the ethics. So the state deputies who are covered under the bargaining unit and their state employees, the 24 state deputies, and I understand that the proposal is to add them to the financial disclosures on the ethics piece, but that would put them in a unique position as realistically state employees who are not elected, not appointed, high-level appointees, not exempt employees such as people like me and John, where they'd be like pay grade 21 employees who are being asked to disclose financially, and other state employees don't have to do that. So I just throw that out there as a question for the committee to consider. I think what the committee was originally looking at was the question as to whether or not they could solicit. This really came as a result of that Addison County situation where you had the sheriff that was soliciting funds to pay for the same thing that the sheriff should be doing with state and county funds. And I just threw that out there because as I was listening, I was thinking, I'm not sure that as state employees at that level, they'd be the only ones being required to make financial disclosures.
Yeah, so Executive Director Sivert had talked a bit about the the idea of adding a financial disclosure. The committee hasn't done that yet, and we haven't looked at a draft that contemplates that yet. So if we do, I'm hearing from you that the financial disclosure should only apply to the elected, not the deputy sheriffs.
Or at least to consider that it would be outside the norm of, we don't make other state employees provide financial disclosures, particularly what I kind of would call, the working class of state government, sort of the people that are, not at the high levels of, they're regular Joe state employees.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. I really appreciate you coming in and clarifying some of that for us. So, committee, thanks for staying a little later than usual today. It's going to be that kind of a week, so be prepared. So we'll pick this back up tomorrow after we look at our Linden charter change in the morning. We'll be spending much of the rest of the day on this. And so thank you very much. I will communicate these notes to Tim, and hopefully by mid-morning tomorrow, some of the things we talked about today will be in an updated draft. But for now, we will adjourn.